The 48-Hour Countdown. Part 1. The Message. It was a night like any other in the city. The low hum of distant traffic seeped through the windows of the precinct as Detective Lucas Harmon pored over the latest case files on his desk. The scent of stale coffee hung in the air, and the flickering light from his desk lamp cast long shadows on the wall. His mind was elsewhere, as it often was. The quiet clatter of footsteps echoed down the hallway, breaking his reverie. He looked up to see Officer Lisa Martinez, her face drawn and weary from another long day of routine paperwork. But there was something different about the look in her eyes. She had that urgency, the same look people had when they carried bad news. "Detective," she began, her voice tight, "you need to see this." Lucas sighed, pushing the case files aside, and stood up. "What is it now?" Lisa handed him a folded piece of paper. The paper was creased, worn, and stained at the edges. He unfolded it, and his eyes scanned the words. 48 hours. Meet me at the old church at midnight. If you don't come, I'm gone forever. Adrian. Lucas stared at the words, the hair on the back of his neck prickling. The name sent a jolt of recognition through him. Adrian Kane, the young journalist who had disappeared 3 years ago under mysterious circumstances. A promising career cut short, his vanishing unsolved and buried under the weight of time. "Is this some kind of joke?" Lucas muttered, crumpling the paper in his fist. But Lisa didn't look convinced. "Look closer," she said. There was a smudge of ink at the bottom of the letter, something faint, almost illegible. Lucas squinted at it, trying to make sense of the scrawled writing. "Find the truth, or I will never be found." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He'd seen enough to know that when people vanished, the story usually ended in tragedy or a twisted truth. But the urgency in those words, especially with the cryptic hint at some unknown truth, pulled at something inside him. "I've heard rumors about Adrian," Lucas muttered. "Some say he was into things he shouldn't have been. But this is insane. People don't just send messages from the beyond." "I know," Lisa replied, her voice low. "But this doesn't feel like a prank, Lucas. Adrian's disappearance, it was never solved. And if there's even a chance he's still alive?" Lucas glanced at the clock. It was already late, but there was no way he could let this go. Not after 3 years. "Get the car," he ordered. "We're going to that church." Part 2. The Old Church. The city streets seemed quieter than usual as Lucas and Lisa drove through the rain-soaked streets. The old church was on the outskirts of town, near the abandoned part of the district that most people avoided. The building itself was a relic from another time, crumbling and weathered, its stone walls battered by decades of neglect. As they neared, the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Lucas parked the car in the shadow of the church and looked over at Lisa, who had been silent for most of the drive. She was tense, her fingers gripping the seat. "Stay close," he said. "This could be a setup." They both stepped out into the chill night air, the rain falling in steady sheets. The church loomed ahead, its towering silhouette illuminated only by the dim glow of a nearby street lamp. A few paces into the yard, Lucas felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. There was something off about the place. He led the way through the iron gate and up the weathered stone steps, the sound of their footsteps drowned out by the relentless rain. Inside, the air smelled of damp stone and decay. The once beautiful stained glass windows were shattered, their jagged fragments reflecting the moonlight in 1,000 directions. Then a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible rustling from the far corner of the room. Lucas held up his hand, signaling Lisa to stop. He slowly pulled out his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. "Adrian?" he called softly, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. There was no response. He stepped forward cautiously, his flashlight bouncing across the stone floor. And then in the corner, he saw something. A shape, barely visible in the dim light. A figure, hunched over, face obscured by a hood. Lucas's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary encounter. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice firm, his hand resting on his gun. But before the figure could respond, the light flickered and the room went dark. A split second later, the sound of a door slamming shut echoed through the church, followed by footsteps retreating into the shadows. "Damn it!" Lucas cursed, racing toward the door. He could barely see anything in the pitch-black room. He heard Lisa's voice behind him, but it was drowned out by the sound of the rain. "Lucas, wait!" she shouted. But it was too late. The figure had vanished into the night, leaving nothing but the echo of their footsteps behind. Part 3. Unraveling the Truth. The next 24 hours were a blur of investigation. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, or worse, led into a trap. But his instincts told him that the message Adrian had left behind wasn't just a desperate cry for help. It was part of something larger, a conspiracy perhaps, or a game played by someone far more dangerous than they realized. As he and Lisa sifted through Adrian's old notes, they discovered an unsettling pattern. Adrian had been investigating a powerful corporation with links to organized crime. It seemed that the journalist had uncovered something significant, something that had put him in the crosshairs of people who would go to any length to keep their secrets buried. "Look at this," Lisa said, flipping through a series of photographs. These were taken days before Adrian disappeared. "He's meeting with someone here. Someone important." Lucas squinted at the photos, his finger tracing a shadowy figure in the background. It was a man, middle-aged, well-dressed, with a cold expression. There was something familiar about his face, but Lucas couldn't quite place it. "This man," Lucas muttered. "I've seen him before." Part 4. The Countdown. The closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous their pursuit became. It was clear that Adrian's disappearance wasn't an accident. It was part of something much bigger, a web of lies and corruption that spanned much further than they had anticipated. Lucas found himself more entangled in the case than he'd ever been before, his own safety threatened as he uncovered dark secrets about the people he thought he could trust. The final 12 hours were a race against time. The cryptic message had led them down a path that had now converged at the highest levels of power. Whoever was responsible for Adrian's disappearance had been manipulating events from the shadows, and they weren't about to let Lucas and Lisa get any closer to the truth. As the clock ticked down, Lucas had to make a decision: trust his instincts and confront the mysterious figures who had been pulling the strings, or walk away and risk losing everything, including the life of the woman who had helped him through it all. And with each passing minute, the stakes only grew higher. Part 5. Racing toward the truth. The old church had been a dead end. Lucas and Lisa stood at the threshold of the crumbling building, the rain still falling in relentless sheets. Lucas's fingers gripped the crumpled paper with Adrian's message, and his mind raced. The figure in the church had disappeared into the night, but Lucas knew they were no closer to the answers they sought. The feeling of being watched persisted, like the unsettling presence of someone in the shadows. "We need to get back to the precinct," Lucas said, his voice rough from the tension gnawing at him. "There's something we're missing. The message, Adrian's disappearance. It's all connected." Lisa nodded but didn't say anything. She too could feel the gravity of the situation bearing down on them. They were no longer just chasing a missing persons case. They were hunting the ghost of a man who had been trying to expose something that could destroy powerful people. And those people were starting to notice them. Part 6. The Corporate Web. Back at the precinct, the team gathered around a cluttered table littered with case files. The hours were slipping away faster than Lucas cared to admit. They still had no idea who the shadowy figure in the church had been, or why he'd been there in the first place. But one thing was clear: the deeper they dug into Adrian's life, the more dangerous the case became. "Whoever Adrian was dealing with," Lisa said, flipping through a stack of photos and papers, "this isn't just some local crime syndicate. It's bigger than that. This corporation, Vanguard Technologies, it's involved in everything from illegal surveillance to arms deals. And Adrian was on the brink of exposing them." Lucas's jaw tightened. Vanguard Technologies was a name that had come up once or twice during his career, usually in whispered conversations or vague references from informants. The company had a reputation for being untouchable, its ties to high-level government officials and powerful figures in the private sector, granting it a degree of immunity from scrutiny. But now Lucas could see the connections clearly. Adrian had been getting too close to the truth, and someone had made sure he disappeared. The question was, how far were they willing to go to keep their secrets buried? "We need to dig deeper," Lucas said, his eyes narrowing. "But we need to be careful. Whoever's behind this, they're not just after Adrian. They're after anyone who gets too close." Lisa hesitated before speaking. "Lucas, too, has been looking into the man we saw in the photos. His name is Victor Harrington." The name sent a chill through Lucas. Victor Harrington was a well-known figure in the city, wealthy, powerful, and ruthless. He had managed to stay just below the radar, never implicated in any major scandals or investigations. But those who knew him whispered about his ties to organized crime and corporate corruption. His empire was vast, built on manipulation, intimidation, and silence. "He's one of the top executives at Vanguard," Lisa continued, "and Adrian's last known contact was with him. I think Adrian was about to expose Harrington's entire operation." The realization hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. He'd never been directly involved with Harrington's dealings, but the man's influence had always loomed large over the city. If Adrian had truly been onto something that could bring him down, it explained why he had disappeared without a trace. "We need to find him," Lucas said, determination in his voice. "Victor Harrington is the key to all of this." Part 7. The Gathering Storm. The next few hours were a whirlwind of surveillance and intelligence gathering. Lucas and Lisa worked tirelessly, piecing together a web of contacts, transactions, and hidden deals. Every lead they uncovered only seemed to make the situation more complicated, as if they were uncovering layers of a complex puzzle that had been carefully constructed to hide the truth. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find a solid connection between Harrington and Adrian. It was as if the young journalist had vanished into thin air, leaving only breadcrumbs that led them back to dead ends. The closer they got to the truth, the more they realized they were in over their heads. As they pored over Adrian's notes, Lucas paused at a page that seemed different from the rest. It was a drawing, simple but telling, a map of the city with a series of locations marked in red ink. Each one was connected by a faint looping line, almost like a trail leading somewhere. One of the marks stood out, an address on the outskirts of the city, a nondescript building tucked between two warehouses. Lisa leaned over his shoulder. "What do you think this is?" Lucas frowned, his finger tracing the map. "I think it's where Adrian was heading before he disappeared." The thought sent a shiver through him. They had just a day left before the 48-hour countdown expired. If they didn't act now, they might lose their chance to uncover the truth about Adrian and the dangerous people who had silenced him. "Let's go," Lucas said, standing up and grabbing his coat. "We don't have much time." Part 8. Into the Lion's Den. The building was located in an industrial part of the city where the streets were empty and the buildings stood like forgotten monuments to a bygone era. It was exactly the kind of place Lucas expected to find something hidden. An old warehouse, abandoned and forgotten, tucked away from the prying eyes of the world. As Lucas and Lisa approached the building, the air felt thick with tension. They moved quietly, their footsteps muffled by the wet concrete beneath their shoes. The city was eerily silent, as though holding its breath in anticipation. They reached the door of the warehouse and Lucas signaled for Lisa to stay back. He crouched, peering through a crack in the door, trying to make out what was inside. The warehouse was dimly lit, with stacks of old crates and boxes scattered around the space. But there, at the far end of the room, something caught his eye. A figure. It was a man standing by a large wooden crate, his back to the door. His posture was rigid, as though waiting for something or someone. Lucas's heart skipped a beat as he recognized him. It was Victor Harrington. Without thinking, Lucas swung the door open, stepping into the warehouse with his gun drawn. The sudden motion caught Harrington's attention. The man turned slowly, his expression unreadable. I was wondering when you'd show up, Detective, Harrington said, his voice smooth, almost amused. You've been asking the right questions, but you're too late. Part 9, the final countdown. The standoff in the warehouse was like something out of a nightmare. Lucas's gun was aimed squarely at Harrington, but the man showed no fear. Instead, there was a calmness in his demeanor that unsettled Lucas. As the seconds ticked by, the truth about Adrian's disappearance became clearer and darker. Victor Harrington wasn't just involved in Adrian's disappearance. He had orchestrated it. You've been playing into my hands all along, Lucas, Harrington said, his voice almost taunting. Adrian was never meant to be found. He was a threat, and threats need to be eliminated. You murdered him, Lucas spat, his hands trembling with rage. Harrington smiled, his eyes glinting with cold malice. No, he's still alive, but I made sure no one would find him, including you. For a moment, Lucas felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Adrian was alive, but where? You have 12 hours left to figure it out, Detective, Harrington said, turning his back as if dismissing Lucas entirely. But don't think you'll have time to save him. By then, it will be too late. Part 10. The Search for Adrian. The warehouse felt like a tomb, the weight of the moment pressing down on Lucas and Lisa as they stared at Victor Harrington's retreating figure. The revelation that Adrian was still alive was a flickering hope in the midst of an otherwise hopeless situation. But as Harrington's words echoed in Lucas's mind, by then it will be too late. He felt the urgency settle deep in his gut. Lucas, we can't let him get away, Lisa said, her voice shaky but determined. He knows something. He has to. Lucas's grip on his gun tightened, but he knew that confronting Harrington directly wouldn't solve anything. The man was too powerful, too well connected. If they were going to save Adrian, they needed to outsmart him. We have to find Adrian, Lucas said, his voice resolute. Now. Without another word, the two of them sprinted from the warehouse. The streets were darker now, the rain still coming down in sheets, as though nature itself was complicit in the chaos around them. The clock was ticking, and they had less than 12 hours to find Adrian and expose the conspiracy before the countdown ran out. Part 11. The Web Tightens. Back at the precinct, Lucas and Lisa scrambled to piece together what they knew about Adrian's investigation. The map he had drawn, the one with the red marks, was more than just a guide. It was a map of power, a trail that led through the city's most dangerous places. Each location marked on the map connected back to Vanguard Technologies, the corporation that had already claimed Adrian's life once. We're missing something, Lucas said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. This map, the pictures, everything points back to Harrington. But what does he want? Lisa paused, her eyes narrowing as she flipped through Adrian's notes. Then she stopped, staring at a phrase that had been repeated several times in Adrian's writing. The Watchers, they never sleep. What if Adrian wasn't just chasing down corporate corruption? Lisa said, her voice trembling with the sudden realization. What if there's something deeper here? Something more sinister? Lucas's heart raced. The Watchers, the phrase had been mentioned in passing, but they had dismissed it as paranoia. Now Lisa's insight was making sense of the bigger picture. Who are they? Lucas muttered under his breath. Lisa turned toward the computer screen, typing quickly. I'll check public records. See if any private security firms or shadow organizations go by that name. It didn't take long before Lisa found something chilling. The Watchers weren't just a name. They were an elite, covert security firm that worked for the highest bidder. Their operations ranged from corporate espionage to political manipulation, their clientele consisting of some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world. And as it turned out, they had recently signed a large contract with Vanguard Technologies. Adrian was getting too close to something massive, Lucas said, dread settling in his chest. He must have uncovered evidence that linked the Watchers to Harrington and the company. They'd been pulling the strings all along. Lisa's face paled as the implications of their findings hit her. Then they must have been monitoring him. And now us. We're not just up against Harrington, we're up against a shadow army. Lucas stood up abruptly, grabbing his coat. We need to go back to the warehouse. I don't think Adrian's there, but something tells me the Watchers are. Part 12. A Shadow in the Dark. The drive back to the industrial district was fraught with tension. Lucas's mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. The closer they got to uncovering the truth, the more dangerous things became. He knew that if they didn't act quickly, Adrian might never have a chance to tell his side of the story. Or worse, he could be gone forever. As they pulled up to the warehouse district, Lucas scanned the area. It was eerily quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of city lights in the distance. He parked the car in a hidden spot, and the two of them silently made their way to the warehouse where they had confronted Harrington earlier. They crept through the shadows, their footsteps muffled by the wet ground. When they reached the door to the warehouse, they stopped. The door was slightly ajar, as though someone had been here recently. The air felt heavy, charged with a sense of impending danger. "Stay alert," Lucas whispered, motioning for Lisa to follow him inside. They moved cautiously through the dark interior, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. As they ventured deeper into the warehouse, Lucas's pulse quickened. The space was quiet, too quiet. It felt as though the building itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a noise, a low thump, followed by a soft rustle. Lucas froze, his hand instinctively going to his gun. He motioned for Lisa to stay behind him as they approached the source of the sound. In the corner of the room, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Adrian. He was alive, ragged, bruised, and covered in dirt, but alive. "Adrian!" Lucas exclaimed, rushing to his side. Adrian winced as he stood, his hands shackled to a metal pipe. His eyes were wide with fear, his breathing shallow. You shouldn't have come," he gasped, his voice hoarse. "We're getting you out of here," Lisa said, her eyes glistening with tears as she worked to free Adrian from his restraints. "You're safe now." Adrian shook his head weakly. "No, you don't understand. They're watching. They always watch." His voice faltered as he looked over his shoulder, a look of pure terror crossing his face. "Harrington, and the Watchers, they know you're here." The words hit Lucas like a cold wind. "What do you mean? Who are they?" Adrian's eyes darted around the room as if expecting someone to leap out of the shadows. "They're everywhere. The Watchers aren't just hired guns. They have eyes everywhere, in the highest places. Harrington, he's not just an executive. He's a puppet master. You're not safe. No one is." Before Lucas could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind. The air seemed to thicken with the weight of impending doom. The Watchers were closing in. "We need to leave now," Lucas hissed, grabbing Adrian's arm. "They're coming." Part 13. The Final Hour. The race to escape the warehouse was a blur of panic and adrenaline. As Lucas and Lisa pulled Adrian toward the exit, the heavy footsteps grew louder. The Watchers were here, and they weren't taking prisoners. Just as they reached the door, a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall, menacing man, his face obscured by a black mask. He held a weapon in one hand, his posture unyielding. "It's over, Detective," the man said coldly. "You've reached the end of the line." Without warning, Lucas drew his gun and fired, the sound of the shot ringing through the air. The figure collapsed to the ground, but Lucas knew it wouldn't be long before more would follow. "We have to move now," he shouted, pushing Adrian and Lisa toward the car. The tension in the air was palpable as they ran, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the dark, relentless rain. But the countdown was far from over. The final hours of this deadly game were only beginning. Part 14. The Chase. The rain pelted the windshield of Lucas's car as he drove at breakneck speed through the industrial district. Adrian, slumped in the back seat, was still struggling to process everything that had happened. His hands trembled, and the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. "We need to get him to a safe house," Lisa said, her voice tight with anxiety as she looked over her shoulder at Adrian. The Watchers won't stop until they silence him, until they silence both of you. Adrian nodded weakly. I can't hide anymore. They'll find me. I've seen their methods. He paused, a flash of terror flickering in his gaze. I thought I was dead when I found out the truth. I never thought they'd let me live long enough to share it. Lucas glanced at Lisa, his jaw tight. We don't have time to wait for a safe house. We need to go public with what we know now. If we expose it, if we leak the files, they'll kill us before we get the chance, Adrian interrupted. This isn't just about money or power. The people behind this, they don't care about anything except maintaining control. If you try to expose them, they'll erase you. Lucas's eyes flickered toward the rearview mirror. He didn't like the way the night felt. The feeling of being hunted was tangible, and something in the pit of his stomach told him they were being followed. He had no proof, just instinct. The same gut feeling that had kept him alive all these years. We need to make a stop, Lucas said, veering the car toward an old, unmarked building just outside the city limits. It was a decoy, a place he knew would offer them a brief window of safety, though it was far from secure. Part 15. The Reveal. They parked the car in a shadowed alley beside the building, and Lucas quickly led Adrian and Lisa inside. The space was cold and empty, with little more than a few crates and some scattered debris. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hide in for a few hours. Once inside, Adrian collapsed onto a wooden crate, his body racked with exhaustion. Lisa immediately moved to his side, examining the bruises on his face. Adrian, listen to me, Lucas said, his voice sharp. You're not safe here, but you can help us. We need to understand everything you found out. The Watchers, Harrington, Vanguard Technologies. Adrian swallowed hard, his eyes darting between the two of them. You're right, but you need to understand. This is bigger than anything you've ever dealt with. It's not just a matter of exposing a corporation. It's about exposing a network that has infiltrated everything. Governments, private sectors, and criminal organizations. They control everything. And if they find out I'm talking, they'll stop at nothing to eliminate me. Lisa's face paled as the weight of Adrian's words sank in. But Lucas was determined to hear it all. What did you find? What exactly are they planning? Adrian closed his eyes, his voice barely above a whisper. They've been orchestrating global events for years, manipulating governments, starting wars, causing financial collapses. Everything they do is part of a bigger plan to create a new world order, and they're about to make their final move. The Watchers, they're not just hired muscle. They're soldiers, trained to carry out their orders without question. A cold shiver ran down Lucas's spine as he processed what Adrian had just revealed. It was like everything he had believed about the world. The rules of law, the power of truth, was being stripped away, revealing a far darker reality. And Harrington? Lisa asked, her voice shaking. What's his role in all of this? Victor Harrington is their key player, Adrian said with a grim smile. He's not just a businessman. He's the orchestrator of everything. He's the one pulling the strings, the one who's been controlling the Watchers from the shadows. He doesn't just have wealth. He has influence. And he's the one who made sure I was silenced. Adrian paused, taking a shaky breath. They're going to launch their final operation in the next 12 hours. It's already in motion, and once it's completed, it will change everything. The world will never be the same. Lucas felt his heart drop. The final operation. That was the key to everything. And where is it happening? Lucas asked, his voice growing urgent. Adrian's eyes flickered with fear. I don't know the exact location, but I know one thing. It's going to happen in plain sight, somewhere no one would suspect. They're making their final play, and once it's set in motion, they'll be untouchable. The clock was ticking. With every second, the threat grew closer. But now there was one glimmer of hope. Adrian had the information they needed to stop it. Part 16. The Last Stand. As the hours slipped away, Lucas and Lisa moved with renewed purpose. They knew they had to act fast, but they also had to be strategic. They couldn't take down the entire Watchers network without risking everything. The world wasn't ready for the kind of chaos Adrian's information could cause. They had to be careful. "I know what we need to do," Lucas said, his voice steady. "We need to get this information to someone who can make a difference. Someone who has the power to take down Harrington and the Watchers before it's too late." Adrian nodded weakly. "There's a journalist. Her name is Claire Jameson. She's been investigating Vanguard for years, but she hasn't been able to get anywhere. She's the only one I trust to take this to the public." "Then we get to her," Lisa said, determination in her eyes. But just as they made their plan, a noise echoed from outside the building, the unmistakable sound of vehicles pulling up. The Watchers had found them. Lucas grabbed Adrian by the arm, pulling him to his feet. "We don't have time for this. We're leaving." Part 17, the final countdown. The gunfire erupted almost immediately as they dashed toward the exit. The Watchers weren't just after Adrian. They were after all of them. They had no intention of letting them leave alive. Lucas's pulse raced as they fought their way through the dark alleys, each step closer to their destination, feeling like it might be their last. They reached the car, but just as they were about to get inside, a figure appeared in the street, blocking their path. It was Harrington. He was flanked by two of his enforcers, their guns drawn and ready. "I should have known you'd make it this far, Lucas," Harrington said, a cruel smile playing at his lips. "But this is where it ends. No one escapes the Watchers." Adrian looked up at Harrington with a mix of disgust and defiance. "You'll never win, Harrington. The world will know what you've done. Your empire is falling." Harrington's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "You're too late, Adrian. It's already in motion. By the time you expose me, it won't matter. You'll all be dead." But Lucas wasn't about to let it end here. With one final desperate move, he lunged forwards, taking down one of the enforcers with a swift punch. Lisa followed suit, knocking the other man to the ground. But as Lucas turned to face Harrington, a deafening sound tore through the air. A gunshot. Everything went black. Part 18. A deadly betrayal. The world seemed to stand still for a moment. Lucas's ears were ringing from the gunshot. His body was frozen, his senses overwhelmed by the shock. He could feel the weight of Adrian's body collapsing to the ground beside him, but everything else felt distant, out of focus. The taste of iron lingered in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of gunpowder. Was it over? He thought. Had they lost? Then, something unexpected. The pain wasn't in his chest. It was his leg where he had been grazed by the bullet. A deep breath, and he registered that he was still alive, but barely. He glanced up to see Lisa standing over him, her expression tight with panic. "They hit you, Lucas! We need to move!" Lisa shouted, urgency cutting through her fear. Lucas pushed himself up, wincing from the pain, and immediately looked over at Adrian. He was on the ground, blood oozing from a wound on his shoulder. But Adrian's eyes were still alive with fire. "Go!" Adrian rasped, his voice a pained whisper. "Get out of here. They're not gonna stop. You can't do this alone." "No, Adrian, we're not leaving you," Lisa insisted, her eyes scanning the area, but Lucas knew they had no time to waste. Harrington's smug voice reached their ears. "It's over. You have no idea what you're up against." He stepped forward, flanked by two more men who were now aiming their weapons at the trio. It was then that Lucas realized the truth. The game was never about Adrian. It had always been about him and Lisa. They were the ones who had the power to expose a conspiracy. They were the ones the Watchers had been waiting for. "Why are you doing this?" Lisa demanded, stepping forward, her voice shaking but resolute. "Why take everything so far? Why risk everything for control?" Victor Harrington looked at her as if she were a mere annoyance. "Because, my dear, control is everything. You have no idea how deep the rot goes. You still think you can fight it, but you can't. I own this city. I own everything. And now you're going to die." Before Lucas could act, A sudden explosion shattered the night. The building beside them crumbled, sending debris flying in every direction. The shockwave hit them, throwing them all to the ground. It was chaos. Fire and smoke filled the air, and for a split second, everything seemed to blur together. "Get up!" Lucas shouted as he pulled himself to his feet, adrenaline coursing through him despite the pain. "We're not done yet!" Adrian, despite his injury, staggered up, his hand clutching the wound on his shoulder. Lisa helped him as they both ran toward Lucas, but Harrington wasn't done yet. "You're wasting your time," Harrington shouted over the roar of the flames. "The countdown is set. You can't stop it. It's already in motion." Then, just as the smoke cleared, Lucas spotted something that sent a wave of realization crashing over him. There, emerging from the shadows, was another figure. A familiar one. Claire Jameson, the investigative journalist who had been working with Adrian. "Claire, what are you doing here?" Lucas shouted, a flicker of hope flashing in his chest. Claire's eyes were wide with panic, her clothes singed from the explosion, but she still held her ground. She raised a hand to signal them to move toward her. "We don't have much time," Claire said urgently. "The final operation is happening tonight. I've been tracking Vanguard's movements for months, but they've been one step ahead. Harrington, he's not working alone." She turned toward Harrington, her gaze fierce. "I've been working with the CIA. You didn't think I was just a reporter, did you, Victor?" Harrington's expression faltered for just a second, then his face twisted with anger. He lunged at her, but before he could reach her, Lucas, despite the pain, grabbed him from behind, pulling him away from Claire. There was a brief struggle, but Lucas wasn't going to let him win. Not after everything that had happened. "Tell us what's going on, Harrington," Lucas demanded, twisting the man's arm. "The truth. Now." Victor's face contorted into a grin, but it was cold and calculating. "You still don't get it. It's too late. The countdown's almost finished. By the time you realize what's happening, everything will be in flames." Claire, standing just behind them, cursed under her breath. "He's right," she said, shaking her head. "The Watchers, they've been infiltrating the highest levels of government. There's a sleeper agent in every major city. If this operation succeeds, it's not just about money or power, it's about control of the world stage. Total chaos." Lucas felt his heart drop as everything clicked into place. They weren't just manipulating the economy or causing wars. They were setting up a global collapse, engineered by Harrington's empire. Adrian stumbled forward, a fierce glint in his eyes. "We need to shut it down now. The data I gave you, Claire. Did you send it to anyone yet?" Claire's face paled as she nodded. "Yes. The moment I got your message, I sent everything I had to my contact in the CIA. They're moving in to take down Vanguard's network. But we need to act fast. If Harrington triggers the final sequence, then it's over," Lucas finished for her, his voice cold. Adrian glanced toward the horizon. The glow from the fires was still rising in the distance, casting an eerie light over the city. "We have one chance. There's a server farm in the heart of the city. If we get there before Harrington activates the final protocol, we can take it down, shut down everything he's set up." Lucas looked toward Lisa, then back at Adrian and Claire. He didn't have much time to think. There was no room for hesitation. "Let's move." Part 19. The Heart of the Beast. They ran. Time was running out. Harrington and his men were still in pursuit. But Lucas and his group had a mission now, a clear objective. The server farm, where all the encrypted files, where everything that was fueling Vanguard's operation, was stored. It was their final opportunity to expose the truth before everything fell apart. They raced through the city, the night air thick with tension. Lucas kept his eyes trained on the road ahead, feeling the adrenaline surge through him. The information they had was enough to destroy Harrington's empire, but it was a race against time. As they neared the server farm, a high-tech building with blacked-out windows, Lucas realized this was it, the final showdown. If they didn't get inside and disable the system, they were doomed. He felt Adrian's hand on his shoulder. "No matter what happens, Lucas, You've done more than enough. This is for the world. And for the first time in days, Lucas felt the weight of what they were fighting for. Not just his own survival, not just revenge, but something bigger, something that could save the world. With one last glance at Lisa, who was gripping her gun with steady hands, he nodded. Let's end this. Part 20. The final hour. The server farm loomed ahead, a monolith of glass and steel that seemed to absorb the city's darkness. It was here, at the heart of the beast, that everything would either be won or lost. The lives of countless innocent people, the truth they fought to expose, and the balance of power across the globe rested on the next few moments. Lucas, Lisa, Adrian, and Claire approached the building, the hum of technology from within vibrating through the air. Every step felt heavier than the last, their urgency pressing down like a physical weight. This is it, Lisa said, her voice low but determined as they huddled near the door, taking cover in the shadows. We go in, disable the servers, and get the hell out. The truth has to get out. Claire nodded, her eyes focused on the building's entrance. Once we're inside, we don't have much time. The system is likely locked down tighter than a vault, but I've got a few tricks left up my sleeve. Adrian clutched his shoulder, the bloodstain on his shirt growing darker, but his expression remained steadfast. I can help. I know the layout of the facility, but I won't be able to fight much longer. I'll be your eyes. Just get me close. Lucas glanced around. The night was quiet, almost too quiet, and the wind carried with it a sense of impending doom. The watchers weren't far behind. They had to move quickly, but they had to be careful. One wrong step, and the entire operation would collapse. He took a deep breath and turned to face his team, his resolve solidifying. We can't stop now. The world needs to know. We do this together. Now let's go. Part 21. Into the heart of the beast. With swift, deliberate movements, they made their way toward the entrance of the server farm. It was a high-security facility, guards at every corner, cameras tracking their every move. But Claire had already disabled the exterior surveillance system. They'd have a few minutes before the system reset. Adrian led the way, his footsteps slow but purposeful, guiding them past locked doors and through narrow hallways. Every moment felt like an eternity, but Lucas kept his focus. They had one objective: reach the central server room. They rounded a corner and stopped short. Two guards stood just outside the server room, their guns casually slung over their shoulders. It would only take one alarm to bring the whole place down on them. Claire motioned for silence, pulling a small device from her bag. It was a signal jammer, simple but effective. She activated it, cutting off any communication between the guards and their command center. It was a small window, but it was enough. Lisa and Lucas exchanged a glance, silently agreeing. They moved in unison, fast and quiet, and before the guards knew what hit them, they were on the ground, incapacitated. We're in, Lucas whispered, his breath coming in short bursts. The tension was unbearable. Adrian's voice crackled through his earpiece. The central server is 2 floors down. We've got to move quickly. They'll know something's wrong soon. They didn't have much time. The countdown was ticking, each second drawing them closer to an uncertain future. Part 22. The countdown reaches 0. The server room was a high-tech fortress. Rows upon rows of servers hummed in the dim light, their blinking lights reflecting off the cold metal walls. It was here in this heart of information that Harrington's entire operation resided. The global conspiracy, the control over governments, corporations, and economies. Everything. Claire moved swiftly to a terminal, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she accessed the system. Lucas stood by, watching the door, his hand on his gun. They were getting closer, but the air was thick with tension. I'm in, Claire said, her voice steady, but her face drawn with exhaustion. I can see the final protocol. It's set to trigger in... She glanced at the clock on her screen. 2 minutes. Adrian gritted his teeth. We don't have 2 minutes. We need to shut it down now. Lucas's pulse quickened. The walls were closing in. The countdown. It was almost over. Suddenly, the door behind them slammed open. Harrington's voice rang out, dark and smug. Did you think you could stop it? It's too late, Lucas. Too late for all of you. The watchers rushed into the room, guns drawn, their eyes cold and calculating. I should have known, Lucas muttered, his fingers tightening around the gun. You were always one step ahead. Harrington smirked, stepping into the room, his expression one of absolute control. You're too predictable. You never understood the depth of the system. You thought you could bring it all down with a few files? You're just pawns in a much larger game. Claire turned, her face set in grim determination. You won't win, Victor. The truth will come out. It's over. Harrington's eyes flashed with a mix of fury and something far darker. It was never about the truth. It was about power. And now you're going to watch as the world falls apart. He raised his gun. Part 23. A fight for the future. Everything happened in a blur. Time slowed, the seconds stretching into eternity, as the gunfire erupted. Lucas dove for cover, firing back as the watchers moved in from all sides. He could hear the shots whizzing by, the deafening sound of chaos unfolding in front of him. Lisa was at his side, her face set in grim determination as she took down one of the watchers with precision, while Claire continued to work at the terminal, her fingers a blur on the keyboard. Come on, Claire muttered under her breath. Just a little more. Adrian, his shoulder still bleeding, moved towards the door, trying to cover their backs, but there were more watchers coming. His strength was fading fast. With every breath, Lucas could feel the weight of the moment. They were so close, they couldn't fail now. And then with a sharp beep, the screen in front of Claire flashed. Got it. I've overridden the protocol. The room went quiet. For the briefest moment, the gunfire ceased. The countdown clock that had been ticking down to 0 stopped. Harrington's face twisted with disbelief. No. Yes, Claire said, standing tall as she locked eyes with him. It's over. Your game is finished. Lucas stepped forward, his gun still trained on Harrington. You're done. The truth is out now, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Harrington's smug expression melted into one of pure rage. He lunged at Claire, but Lucas was faster. He grabbed him by the arm and slammed him into the wall, his fist connecting with Harrington's face in a final blow. As the watchers were neutralized and the system began to shut down, the room fell into a tense silence. Part 24. A new beginning. Hours later, the group was finally out of the server farm, the city skyline in the distance, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. They were safe, for now. Adrian leaned heavily on Claire as they walked down the street, the blood from his shoulder finally beginning to slow. Lisa was at his side, her expression softening, a rare moment of relief washing over her. Lucas stood at the front, his mind racing. The world had been saved, but it wasn't just the fight they'd won. They'd exposed a system of corruption and control that had held the world hostage for far too long. This isn't the end, Lucas said, his voice calm but resolute. It's just the beginning. There's more work to do. Claire smiled, though there was exhaustion in her eyes. You're right, but we've made the first move, and that counts for something. They paused, looking out at the city, knowing that though the battle had been won, the war for the truth would continue. But they had each other, and now, with the information they gathered, they had the power to make a real difference. The countdown had stopped. The world had been saved. But the fight for justice was only just beginning.